Hey there, Kindred Spirits. Welcome to Kindred Spirits Book Club, the podcast where two grown ladies geek out about Anne of Green Gables. I'm Kelly Gerner, and I'm here with my co-host, Reagan Duffy.
Hello, Kindred Spirits.
Hey, Reagan.
How are you, Kel?
Oh, doing great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Kindred Spirits, during the holiday season, or more likely in that funny, limbo space in the week between Christmas and New Year's. This is that wonderful time of year where you don't know what time of day it is. You don't know what actual day of the week it is. You are still eating turkey. Unclear if that was from Christmas Eve dinner or Christmas dinner or whatever, but here it is.
It kind of feels like nothing that happens in that week really counts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like you don't start anything new, kind of like random last week at the end of the year that
Feels like a bonus week. And I know you almost never work during this week, Reagan. I will occasionally work this week between Christmas and New Year's just because it is such a weird time of year. And sometimes it's really great for me to kind of tie up any loose ends and finish everything up and get ready for next year. But this year I'm firmly out of office.
I think that is a good plan, and I think you deserve that. Nothing really counts until school starts again. So
No, nothing counts. That's the best part about this time of year. Days aren't real, meals aren't real, time isn't real. Have another peppermint chocolate mocha. Enjoy. Read another romance novel. Via con Dios. Live your best life.
I agree 100%. Well, so Kindred Spirits. Today, we are going to be talking about Jem Blythe's character arc. This is a heavy episode because Jem spends the bulk of the book at war. So, we just want to give you guys that heads up. But before we get into Jem Blythe, Kindred Spirits, we wanted to ask your thoughts on collecting things. And the reason we are talking about this is because, as many of you know, Kelly lost her home and all of her possessions in the fires. Oh my gosh, this will be coming up on a year.
Coming up on a year. Gosh, time flies.
Right. And so, of course, by now, Kel, you've got all of your basics covered, all of those types of things.
We are doing good. Couch, check. Bed, check. Somehow we already have 25 mugs.
Well, okay, so mugs are a great segue into this, but we were talking a little bit about should you start collecting things? And if so, what? Because you are no longer tied to anything you used to collect.
It's so weirdly liberating. It is both deeply tragic and incredibly liberating because as Reagan knows, I am a collector and I had many, many things that I collected and felt very passionately about. I collected beautiful vintage china. I was inspired by my grandmother, especially teacups and teapots and things like that, and very picky about it. That was one of my hardest losses. But I also collected little elephant statues, right? And I had probably hundreds of them because that was one of those things. As a kid, I told my parents I liked elephants, and then that became the default gift for me for every occasion for forever.
Yeah. Once you become that person, then people are like, oh, this has an elephant on it. This is for Kelly.
This is for Kelly. Yeah, exactly right. I don't know if I will continue to collect elephants. I think me and the elephants had a really good long run of 40 odd years and maybe we're okay.
Yeah.
Certainly, I collect a lot of books and we collect a lot of Anne books, and the Kindred Spirits were absolutely indispensable in helping me restore that collection, which I am eternally, eternally grateful for. Another collection is a lot of things like accessories, like vintage scarves and interesting hats and things like that. I don't know. That kind of stuff is hard because that was years and years of thrift shopping and all of that. I think that will come more organically.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that. As you move through the world, you'll find
and probably those were things gathered also with kind of a particular purpose in mind, right? So as events come up and you're like, you know what? This event calls for a hat, right? Or something of that nature.
Or you're on vacation and you see a beautiful scarf or something like that. I mean, that was, I think, a lot of those kinds of things. So those collections will come back. But when I think about my teacups, a dedicated collection, I don't know, it feels like sky's the limit.
Yeah. Recently, we were looking through a whole bunch of photos to try and identify some of the teacups and tea sets that you lost, and hopefully that was helpful. But then that's the question. Do you want to just replace those directly? Or do you want to kind of see what teacups come into your life as you're out in the world?
I know. It's an interesting question. And I really think that the fun part about this at this point is that I get to be very intentional about it. And I really get to choose what I love, what makes me happy, what speaks to my soul. My original China collection was based on my grandmother's. I inherited a lot of hers. And so then I was just trying to build it out. So I kept everything kind of in a similar vein. I could go completely rogue. I could do something totally different. And that's kind of a fun and exciting thing to think about. So, Kindred Spirits, let us know what you are collecting. What do you love? Come find us on Instagram and show us your collections. We would love to see them.
For sure. And if you have any ideas of what Kelly should collect, please let us know.
Sky is the limit. This is an exciting time.
Well, Kindred Spirits, if you ever find yourself shouting your thoughts at your phone while you are listening to our podcast, you can come tell us on Instagram. As we were mentioning, we are kindredspirits.bookclub there. If you are loving the podcast, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars and post a review to Apple, Spotify, Pocket Cast, wherever you listen. It helps more and fans find our little corner of the internet. If you would also like to support the podcast, you can shop our bookshop.org link. You'll find it in our show notes to find all the books that we recommend in our pods and some of our favorite editions of the Ella Montgomery books. You'll be helping to support the pod when you do that. You'll also be supporting indie booksellers too. So win, win, win.
Our kindred spirit of the episode is Jem Blythe. Jem is Anne's oldest son. He is the leader of the Rainbow Valley Children. He has an adventurous spirit. He loves dogs and nature, fishing, and he just is out there living in the world with tons of enthusiasm. In Rilla of Ingleside, we see Jem dauntlessly enlist in World War I the moment England declared war. His experience of the war changes him forever and changes his family forever. Our quote of the episode actually doesn't come from Rilla of Ingleside. It comes from Rainbow Valley, but it tells us so much about Jem that it seems right to start our episode with it. In the last chapter of Rainbow Valley, the kids are all celebrating together before Jem leaves to begin his studies at Queen's. "Oh, I wish we had the old days back again," exclaimed Jem. "I'd love to be a soldier, a great triumphant general. I'd give everything to see a big battle." Well, Jem was to be a soldier, and to see a greater battle than had ever been fought in the world. But that was as yet far in the future. And the mother, whose firstborn son he was wont to look on her boys and thank God that the brave days of old, which Jem longed for, were gone forever, and that never would it be necessary for the sons of Canada to ride forth to battle for the ashes of their fathers and the temples of their gods. Walter goes on to prophesy about the piper again. Quote, "But Jem sprang up with a gay laugh. He stood up on a little hillock, tall and splendid, with his open brow and his fearless eyes. There were thousands like him all over the land of the maple. 'Let the piper come and welcome,' he cried, waving his hand. 'I'll follow him gladly round and round the world.'" Oh, it gives me a chill.
It does. It's almost hard to remember that Montgomery did that deliberately.
Yeah.
It feels like such a presentiment.
Yes, it's a really organic way to foreshadow Jem's story. Yeah, this is going to be a tough episode.
And so, content warning, folks, we cannot talk about Jem without talking more in detail about his experience in World War I. So we'll be talking about war and death. So take care if this isn't the moment to listen to the episode. We completely understand. If you choose to go forward, get those tissues handy as well. Just keep them around.
Reagan, as we get started, I'm wondering, when do we think that Maud realized that these characters that she created, Anne and Gilbert, these characters that she loved, when did she know that she would have to send their children to war? Do you think we knew when Maud wrote House of Dreams? Did she know that baby Jem was going to be a soldier?
That is such an interesting question. And perhaps some of the scholars that we know might know the answer to this. Maybe it's in her journals. House of Dreams was published in 1917. She was definitely writing House of Dreams right in the middle of World War I.
Yeah.
So I think on some level, she must have had to think about what this might mean for baby Jem, even if she didn't initially intend that to be the storyline. It's obviously very clear in Rainbow Valley that she knows what Jem's and Walter's paths will be in regards to World War I.
Right. That she's writing really deliberately.
But how heartbreaking when you think about it to write about the birth of a much longed for baby, a baby whose arrival helps heal some of Anne's heartache, and then realize he might be destined for war. I mean, that's really the tragedy of war. All those young folks who are sent to fight, they were all once tiny babies.
Hmm. Well, so that's what we're talking about today, folks. Let's get into Jem's arc from the beloved baby of the House of Dreams to the veteran of a horrific war. So, if you all remember from Anne's House of Dreams, Jem is named after Captain Jim and Matthew Cuthbert, two of the finest men Anne has known, and the two men who were father figures to her. And what has Jem inherited from these two men? From Captain Jim, it seems that Jem has inherited both a sense of adventure and a sense of moral clarity. While Jem might not be interested in sailing necessarily, he was always a kid with a strong sense of adventure, one comfortable sort of fighting as a way of defending those he loved, and he's a natural leader amongst his peers. And then from Matthew, Jem gets this feeling of being at home in nature. And it's not that like poetical connection to nature that Walter and Anne have, but it's a practical one. Like when Matthew would get a thrill from spading up bugs. Jem also knows what plants are safe to eat. He knows where the best fishing spots are. He can clean a fish and fry it up in a heartbeat. He's not squeamish. He's not a farmer like Matthew, but we think he might have been if he had grown up at Green Gables.
In Anne of Ingleside, which was written after Rilla of Ingleside, so it's not retconning because it is consistent with the Gem of Rilla, but it's, what do we call that technique? Like backfilling?
Interconning? If we call them interquels, are they interconned?
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like she's writing their childhood incidents that lead
Sure
up
we
to,
know.
yeah, but she already knows who they are as adults. In any case, in Anne of Ingleside, Jem is a kid who is devoted to his mother. He does have the cloying habit of calling Anne Mother Dearwums, which
I
not a
don't
fan.
like it. I don't like
Not a
it.
fan. No,
No.
no. He loves dogs, desperately wants a dog that is his. He's thoughtful and willing to sacrifice for those he loves. He saves up all his money to buy Anne a pearl necklace. He gives the pining dog Bruno back to Roddy, even though it breaks his heart. Despite his soft heart, Jem's a kid who loves playing pirates and Robin Hood and knights in armor. He's identifying with those chivalric knights, fighting for justice and for those who can't fight for themselves. But he's focusing on the adventure of fighting, not the cost. He will fight anyone who calls Walter a sissy. He defends his own, and he doesn't mind a little gore in his play as he pretends to fight heroic battles. He loves listening to the old sea captains spin yarns down by the harbor, and it's too bad he never knew Captain Jim because he would find him enthralling.
Yes.
Jem has a moral code. He wants to pay for Bruno the dog himself so that he feels like the dog is really his. And he's deeply ashamed to think he accidentally deceived his mother with the pearl necklace, even though he thought they were real pearls when he bought it. In Rainbow Valley, we see Jem just as he's starting to step out of childhood. He doesn't often play in Rainbow Valley. He's studying for his Queen's exam, but he does hang out some evenings with the other kids. The Merediths trust his judgment to ask him about their dilemma with raising themselves, thus giving birth to the Good Conduct Club. And Jem will be the final arbiter if the Merediths cannot agree. He's popular in school, has a good reputation, a reputation that both overshadows and protects Walter. Walter would likely get bullied a great deal more without Jem defending him. But Walter also feels compared to Jem. For instance, Walter knows that Faith Meredith wishes it was Jem with her when Dan Reese teases her, because Jem would never let those insults pass in front of him. When Walter predicts the Piper in Rainbow Valley, both times Jem laughs and declares he will gladly answer the call and follow the Piper to a grand adventure. All in all, Jem is shown to be a rather perfect young man, intelligent, brave, steady, adventurous, and chivalrous. Let's talk for a quick sec about what the definition of chivalry means. I think from a modern perspective, we think of it as a kind of courtesy and respectfulness, holding doors, making sure others are served first, being very gallant, particularly from a man towards a woman. And that's those lower stakes modern definition of chivalry. Originally, it was the knightly code followed by knights in the Middle Ages. It emphasized bravery, honor, justice, and protecting the weak.
Right. Knights and nobility were supposed to adhere to a specific code of conduct. And it was all about this idea of honor that was kind of mixed up with religion and militarism, and as you mentioned, justice and protecting the weak. But the question of like who the weak people who needed protection were was often a very politically or religiously motivated question, right? And over time, through Arthurian legend, which experienced a Victorian Renaissance with Tennyson and especially with Sir Walter Scott's historical poetry and novels, the figure of the knight also took on this very romantic quality. So in addition to these qualities of courage and justice, there was also this idea of courtly love, this sort of like chaste longing between noble women and knights. And Jem is a boy who was raised on those legends, and he takes very seriously his obligation to act with honor, and he believes in using violence and militarism for a greater good. Jem is a textbook young hero in many ways. At the beginning of Rilla, Jem is home from his first year of medical school. He and Faith Meredith are courting. Well, Miss Cornelia thinks they're courting anyway. Anne says they are very good friends. And little Bruce Meredith adores Jem and follows him around whenever he's home. That must mean that Jem is also kind and attentive to little Bruce, which is very, very sweet. When we first see Jem in Rilla of Ingleside, he and Walter are talking about the increasing tensions in Europe. Germany has declared war on France, and they know it's only a matter of time before England defends France. Walter remembers his vision of the Piper from childhood and worries that England will declare war. In response, this is what we hear. Why? We'll all have to turn in and help her, cried Jem gaily. We couldn't let the old gray mother of the northern sea fight it out alone, could we? We're the cubs. We've got to pitch in tooth and claw if it comes to a family row. Jem went on cheerfully, rumpling up his red curls with a strong, lean, sensitive brown hand. The hand of a born surgeon, his father often thought. What an adventure it would be. But I suppose Gray or some of those wary old chaps will patch matters up at the 11th hour. It'll be a rotten shame if they leave France in the lurch, though. If they don't, we'll see some fun. It's an interesting quote, right, Reagan?
Mm-hmm.
Jem leaves the conversation whistling to dress for the dance at the lighthouse. Meanwhile, Walter is still brooding about the hellishness of war.
Yeah, it's quite a stark difference. It's almost shocking to hear Jem talk about something as awful as war as an adventure or some fun. I mean, despite Jem's maturity, he's approaching war here like a boy. And he is only 21, still a boy in many ways. You can see in this exchange that Jem is envisioning war as a stepped up version of the games he played in Rainbow Valley as a kid. It's almost a romantic vision, seeing himself as a bear cub defending his family. And there's that sense of chivalry. He thinks of war as a chance for courage and a readiness to help the weak, but it's an idealized form here. It's not based in reality.
It's still very much a fantasy. It's not real for him yet.
We follow this up by eavesdropping with Rilla on Jem and Faith's conversation on their way to the shore dance. Jem is telling Faith a story he heard about the Balkan War. It's about a mortally wounded doctor who is left on the battlefield to die, crawling around to help as many wounded men as he could, and he died tying a bandage to another man's leg. He was found holding the bandage tight with his dead hands. The bleeding stopped. The man's life saved. Jem is telling Faith what a hero this doctor was, and it clearly inspires him, although they move out of earshot so we don't hear any more. And again, we've got that chivalrous idea of courage and protection, self-sacrifice. Rilla thinks it's a gruesome story. Miss Oliver finds the self-sacrifice awe-inspiring. And for Jem, I think we can infer that this is further evidence of how he has romanticized war. He is thinking of death here as a chance for noble sacrifice rather than a cold reality or a waste of life.
Jem is just so much his mother's son. I think of Anne at a similar age, right, in her late teens, and all those stories she was writing with all kinds of noble suffering and tragedy. And then Jem's version of that is this romantic vision of wartime. It speaks to Jem's youth, certainly, but I also think that he wants to do something that feels big and important and heroic. He wants to make his mark. So also wrapped up in this romance for him, I think, is ambition. During the party, when word comes that England has declared war, Jem responds, quote, "The Piper has come. Hurrah! I knew England wouldn't leave France in the lurch. I've been trying to get Captain Josiah to hoist the flag, but he says it isn't the proper caper till sunrise." And now this is quite a contrast to Walter's reaction. He has another eerie premonition of the Piper and is correctly predicting the huge loss of life and immense scope of the terrible war.
And we see that Jem joins up the very next day, as soon as word comes that they are calling for volunteers. He tells the broken-hearted Anne, "I must, Mother. I'm right, am I not, father? We don't see any hesitation or debate for Jem. If he has any internally, we don't see it on the page. It's a simple question for him of right and wrong. England is fighting, therefore it must be for a good cause. Walter had called it a death grapple. Germany comes to conquer or die. And if England fights, Canada, as a British subject, must fight as well. And if there must be a fight, then Jem feels it is his moral duty to fight. This clarity of purpose, this chivalrous duty, means it's easy for Jem to enlist. He looks tall and handsome in his uniform, the very picture of a brave patriot. At least Rilla thinks so. And Jem's clarity of purpose is contagious for Rilla. She thinks the speed and fearlessness of his enlistment to heeding the call of their country is honorable. She carries her head high, especially among the girls whose own brothers had not yet enlisted. The romance of it is irresistible to Rilla. She's sure that if she were a boy, she would have done the same. But we all know, both from watching Anne grow up and our own lived experiences, that high ideals and high expectations, especially of romantic and daring situations, don't often survive their clash with actual reality. Easy for Jem to be brave when he hasn't truly considered what the experience of war would be like for him or for other people, or seemingly wrestled with whether war in general, or this war specifically, is an unequivocal moral good. Walter shares that he's envious of Jem, that Jem doesn't seem to be thinking, as he does, of how awful it would be to actually fight. Walter says, I think of these things all the time, and it doesn't seem to me that Jem and Jerry ever think of them. They laugh and talk about potting Huns. This sounds rather callous of Jem and Jerry, especially compared to the moral agonies that Walter is suffering. Is it just callousness? Just that Jem and Jerry are easily able to diminish the humanity of the other men they will be fighting? Is it bravado? A way to shrink the scope of what they are about to do into a manageable size? What do you think, Kel?
You know, this is a tough one because we do like Jem and Jerry. We want to think well of them, but I think this is callousness. I think it's youthful, naive insensitivity, maybe, but I also do see a streak of cruelty running through this. I think it's likely that Jem and Jerry have been taken in by the dehumanizing propaganda that would have been all around them at the time. In order for you to go off to war with nothing but excitement, you need to think of your enemy as less than human. And that is something that Jerry and Jem seem all too willing to do, while Walter cannot.
Do you know why the Germans were called Huns by the British during World War I?
I don't know, and I've been scratching my head about it.
I looked it up. So in 1900, Kaiser Wilhelm II gave a speech to German soldiers who were about to be deployed to China to suppress the Boxer Rebellion. And in it, he told them to be like the ancient Huns, known for their fierceness and brutality. He said, quote, the name Hun should be a German one in China. And then during World War I, the British and Allied forces used the Huns label to reinforce the idea that German soldiers were savage and barbaric, and to make Germany seem less like a modern nation and more like a primal force of violence. So it was a piece of propaganda used to make the war seem very good versus evil. And you saw slogans like halt the Hun that really depicted German soldiers as like almost slavering beasts on war bond posters. It definitely makes it easier to kill soldiers across the trench from you when you dehumanize them to a faceless, ruthless horde. So even this early in the war, Jem and Jerry have internalized this propaganda, obviously.
I didn't know that connection to China. And I think that's interesting too, because that's even another way that the propaganda is othering the Germans, because by calling them Huns, they're making them seem even more foreign to people from Europe and North America. So there's that kind of racist, xenophobic undertone there as well.
Absolutely.
The morning that Jem and Jerry leave for training camp at Valcartier, which is outside of Quebec, in case you're curious, everyone is at the station to bid them goodbye, and everyone is smiling as hard as they possibly can. Now, we can't talk about Jem's plot arc without also talking about Dog Monday, so Dog Monday is there too. Quote, Jem had tried to say goodbye to him at Ingleside, but Monday implored so eloquently that Jem relented and let him go to the station. He kept close to Jem's legs and watched every movement of his beloved master. Dog Monday's loyalty to Jem is simple but absolute, and is a kind of mirror to Jem. Jem's commitment to fighting for Canada is as straightforward and uncomplicated as Monday's commitment to Jem. Both Dog Monday and Jem are making a compact in this moment. Jem by enlisting, Dog Monday by waiting for him. It's a straightforward decision for both of them. How could either do anything different, given who they are? but neither of them is fully aware of the length of this commitment or how difficult it's going to be. The train arrives. It's a flurry of goodbyes. Anne is holding Jem's hand. Dog Monday is licking his hand. There's cheers from the men. Jem kisses Faith in front of everyone. And we find out later that Jem carries with him a rose that Faith kissed and gave him the night before. Jem and Jerry are waving as the train pulls away, and Dog Monday is howling, and he even needed to be forcibly restrained from chasing the train as it disappears around the curve.
No one realizes at first that Dog Monday doesn't come home from the station with them. Once they do, Shirley goes to find him. Dog Monday is curled up in a shipping shed near the station, and he would not come home. Quote, he wagged his tail to show he had no hard feelings, but no blandishments availed to budge him. Shirley concludes that Monday has made up his mind to wait there till Jem returns. And we get this quote from Monday's point of view. His dear master had gone. He, Monday, had been deliberately and of malice aforethought prevented from going with him by a demon disguised in the garb of a Methodist minister. Wherefore he, Monday, would wait there until the smoking, snorting monster, which had carried his hero off, carried him back. Maud switches to an omniscient narrator here and then goes on. I wait there, little faithful dog, with the soft, wistful, puzzled eyes, but it will be many a long and bitter day before your boyish comrade comes back to you. As readers, we already know what Jem, Dog Monday, and the rest of the Glen St. Mary folks don't. The war will not be over quickly. And whatever Jem's experience of war will be, it will not be an exciting adventure. Framing it through Dog Monday's choice to wait for Jem, that's interesting. It makes the war itself less tangible. Dog Monday knows nothing about war and European politics, and it makes the cost to those waiting at home more tangible. It's not hard to envision a beloved pet waiting vainly for their person to return home, not knowing or understanding why they are kept away from them. It's such a powerful metaphor for what everyone on the home front is going through. They don't yet understand what their sons and brothers and loved ones will go through. They don't know the scope of what awaits them or how long they will have to wait.
Reagan, I think that's a really beautiful observation. Dog Monday's sort of limited perspective of the war is a perfect symbol of how little everyone understood about what was about to happen. You can picture Maud writing this book once the war had finished and reflecting on those innocent early days. I think the way she brings that through Dog Monday's perspective is really lovely. I mean, that's like just the magic of this book, where for Maud, she doesn't try to talk about the geopolitical situation in Europe. She really keeps it at home. She keeps it so close to the heart, so close to family, and things that everybody can understand, like a beloved pet waiting for you to come home.
With Jem gone, the dispatches from Europe seem closer and more relevant than ever. Jem is not yet in Europe, but the possibility that he will be there soon gives everything even higher stakes than it had already. The Ingleside folks realize that there is no use in getting Dog Monday to come back. They tried carrying him home a few times, but he howled and went on a hunger strike until they let him out, and he bolted right back to the station. So Gilbert arranges for a butcher near the station to feed Monday, and they all take turns making sure at least one person goes to see him every day. When each train comes, Monday rushes to the platform and runs about the debarking passengers, and when he realizes Jem is not among them, he slinks dejectedly back to his shipping shed. That's just the saddest thing to write. And again, it's a metaphor for that constant cycle of hope and despair that is playing out on a larger scale for everyone else.
Right. Every newspaper, every phone call, every telegram, every bit of gossip from someone who's just come home from Charlottetown might bring something good, might bring hopeful news. And then for years and years, it's like nothing hopeful ever comes. Or the alternative, right? That little bit of news might be something awful. And then there's just a reprieve for a short time until the next phone call or newspaper. It's a vicious cycle. And then seeing it play out with Dog Monday is like such a perfect way to put it. By November, Jem is in training camp in England in Salisbury Plain. He's writing cheery letters home despite the mud and the cold, and Susan is busy baking a Christmas cake to send to him. If Jem is scared or worried at this point, if he's regretting enlisting or having any doubt, he's not putting that in any of the letters that we hear about. Now, that first wave of Canadian boys who trained at Salisbury Plain really went through it. That was one of the wettest winters in English history, and those boys basically just hung out digging trenches in the mud for months on end. And the Canadian military also didn't send them with the right clothes to stand up to an English winter, because in Canada, a winter would be like snowy and cold, but still relatively dry. So the soldiers were just in these muddy trenches soaked in heavy wool coats that weren't appropriately waterproof. But by most accounts, the Canadians were hardy and kept good spirits, even in the face of this very demoralizing beginning.
That's interesting. It makes sense because Canada is cold. Canada is
Yep.
cold. And so they're like, oh, we got this. It can't possibly be colder than what we're used to, but it's an entirely different kind of cold.
They needed canvas jackets, they needed waterproof boots, and they were in snow clothes. So very, very rough start for the Canadian military. Now, this is also where Winnie the Pooh comes from. Do you know this story?
I think so, but tell it to me anyway.
So during World War I, a group of young Canadian soldiers from Winnipeg brought with them a sort of mascot to be part of their unit. And this was really common. Like the boys would bring pets of all kinds, but these boys from Winnipeg brought a bear cub.
As one does.
Which is the funniest thing I've ever heard of, how they smuggled a bear cub from the wilds of Winnipeg to Salisbury Plain. I do not know. But anyway, so they were just in there with this bear. At some point, the commanding officers realized that there's a bear, and they said, you can't actually take the bear to France. I'm sorry. And so they took
Draw a line. We draw a line. The bear cannot go to France.
We understand the bear cub is good for morale. You cannot take the bear to France.
Bears don't live in trenches.
This poor bear. He just wanted to be in Winnipeg hunting salmon.
What happened? Where's my trees?
I know, this poor bear. Anyway, so the bear was taken to the London Zoo, where he was named Winnie after Winnipeg, and A.A. Milne was inspired by seeing Winnie at the London Zoo and wrote Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Throughout the book, there's this ongoing thread of like putting on a brave face. The folks on the home front are not supposed to cry or act upset when the soldiers leave, and they write cheerful, fun letters, and they busy themselves with these support tasks, and they express certainty in the moral rightness of the war and the men's bravery in fighting. And then the men at war also are writing light-hearted and stalwart letters back, and they never mention any fears or doubts that they might have themselves about this war. We imagine that part of this is patriotism, and part of this is a short-term coping mechanism, right? That makes sense. Like, even though this is probably exhausting to keep up this front all of the time. As the weather gets colder, the Blythes have a kennel built for Dog Monday to keep him warm, and his story even makes the papers all over Canada. Rilla writes, quote, Jem has gone away. Monday doesn't know where or why, but he will wait until he comes back. Somehow it comforts me. It's foolish, I suppose, but it gives me a feeling that Jem will come back, or else Monday wouldn't keep waiting for him. By February the next year, Jem, Jerry, and Gertrude Oliver's fiancé, Robert Grant, are in the trenches, and the tension ramps up in Ingleside with respect to the war news. Suddenly, the telephone ringing feels ominous, because it could be the station master calling up with a telegram from overseas.
We see a few of Jem's letters home. He writes to Gilbert about some of the conditions on the front, rain and rats and monotonous food, but says it's not so bad. He shares he saw one boy killed right beside him. Jem writes, quote, it was the first time I'd been close to anything like that, and it was a nasty sensation, but one soon gets used to horrors here. We're in an absolutely different world. The only things that are the same are the stars, and they are never in their right places somehow. He goes on to ask Gilbert to tell Anne not to worry. Quote, I'm all right, fit as a fiddle and glad I came. There's something across from us here that has got to be wiped out of the world. That's all. An emanation of evil that would otherwise poison life forever. It's got to be done, Dad, however long it takes and whatever it costs. And you tell the Glen people this for me. They don't realize yet what it is has broken loose. I didn't when I first joined up. I thought it was fun. Well, it isn't. But I'm in the right place, all right. Make no mistakes about that. When I saw what had been done here to homes and gardens and people, well, Dad, I seemed to see a gang of Huns marching through Rainbow Valley and the Glen and the garden at Ingleside. We are fighting to make those dear old places where we had played as children safe for other boys and girls, fighting for the preservation and safety of all sweet, wholesome things. You can see here that Jem, that knight-errant of a child, has framed his experience in the trenches as a grown-up version of that knighthood, righting deep wrongs and making the world safe for other children. Now, whether war at all, or this war in particular, was actually righting a wrong or making the world safer in the long term, it's a much bigger question and probably not one that a young man in the trenches can contemplate at the moment. Jem's identified a bigger purpose to support his sacrifice, but he's lost the illusion that fighting would be an adventure. I think it's notable that he's writing this letter to Gilbert, Perhaps with his father, he can be more real and less lighthearted than in letters to his mother or sisters.
Mm-hmm.
He can trust his dad to hold some of these harder truths. He closes the letter by saying to give Dog Monday some love for him. Quote, fancy the faithful little beggar waiting there for me like that. Honestly, Dad, on some of these dark, cold nights in the trenches, it heartens and braces me up no end to think that thousands of miles away at the old Glen station, there's a small, spotted dog sharing my vigil. And he ends the letter with a line to horrify Susan, saying he's fighting the good fight against Huns and cooties. So Susan responds by adding a fine-tooth comb to the care package she's putting together. So while Jem has lost some of his ideals in romance about war, he's still found an idealistic angle to keep him going through the horrors. Two, actually. A big picture ideal of keeping the world safe, which he grounds in his reality by picturing Rainbow Valley being at risk, and a smaller picture ideal of keeping vigil with Dog Monday.
Ugh, my heart is just breaking for Jem. You see this direct through line from an adventurous little boy with fantasies of knights and sea captains, to an idealistic new recruit influenced by propaganda, to now a more seasoned soldier who has experienced things no one should have to experience, and who is trying to make sense and contextualize all this horror and loss. Jem has to believe that the sacrifices of a generation of young men are worthwhile, and so he's rooted that belief in his deep love for his home and his family and his beloved little dog. And he's trying to keep a brave face for his family too, so they don't lose all hope. The battle at Longmark comes, and the Ingleside folks are beside themselves with worry for Jem until a letter finally comes that he made it through. Quote, I've come through without a scratch, Dad. Don't know how any of us did it. But the Huns haven't got through. They won't get through. Jerry was knocked stiff by a shell one time, but it was only shock. He was all right in a few days. Jerry separately writes to Nan about the experience. It was awful. He came back to consciousness on the battlefield surrounded by dead men. Jerry said, quote, I was woefully thirsty, and I thought of David and the Bethlehem water, and of the old spring in Rainbow Valley under the maples. I seemed to see it just before me, and you, standing, laughing on the other side of it. And I thought it was all over with me. And I didn't care. Honestly, I didn't care. I just felt a dreadful, childish fear of the loneliness and of those dead men around me, and a sort of wonder how this could have happened to me. Then they found me and carted me off. And before long, I discovered that there wasn't really anything wrong with me. I'm going back to the trenches tomorrow. Every man is needed there that can be got. Going back to the trenches tomorrow? Jerry!
Yeah.
This is horrifying. We don't know more about Jerry's perspective when he enlisted, although the fact that he signed up so readily with Jem tells us that he must have been pretty aligned with Jem's worldview there. But we do see in Jerry's letter to Nan some of the despair that must be rampant for the soldiers in the trenches, that he didn't care if it was all over for him. The horrors of war are so far from the ideal safety of Rainbow Valley, so far that he thinks he'll never get back to them at all. We can infer that Jem is having some similar experiences to Jerry as well. Perhaps not so dramatic, but the cold reality of war, a war that is continuing to drag on and on, is surely wearing away at his idealism.
Dog Monday does not cease his vigil. When Walter leaves, Rilla imagines Monday sending a message with Walter for Jem. On the second Christmas of the war, Rilla and Shirley bring Monday a feast of a dinner, and she writes, quote, Dog Monday waits and watches there still, with just as much hope and confidence as ever. Sometimes he hangs around the station house and talks to people, and the rest of the time he sits at his little kennel door and watches the track unwinkingly. We never try to coax him home now. We know it is of no use. When Jem comes back, Monday will come home with him. And if Jem never comes back, Monday will wait there for him as long as his dear dog heart goes on beating.
Oh.
We hear little directly from Jem, except teasing Susan in a letter to Anne saying, quote, tell Susan I had a fine cootie hunt this morning and caught 53. Despite the misery of the trench, it seems Jem is still trying to write with his sense of humor.
I mean, that's what we do when things are horrible, right? We find the funny bits and we find these ways to laugh through the terror. I bet there was a lot of that gallows humor in the trenches.
I think it's the only way to kind of survive.
Yeah. The Verdun offensive begins, dragging everyone into a grim despair, and the local contingent of Glen men and boys that had been training in Charlottetown leave for the front. It's now 2 years since England declared war on Germany. So many young men who had danced at that party are now in the trenches on the Somme front. 2 boys from the Glen area have been killed so far. and there are other local boys who are wounded in hospitals. The news comes that the Canadian contingent have taken important victories at Courcelette and Martinpuy, a victory that causes Susan to run up the flag. But then at dawn, Rilla hears Dog Monday howling, and the station master said he howled from midnight to sunrise. Rilla fears that either Dog Monday is sick or that he somehow senses something bad. When nothing happens either way, she starts to relax, but 5 days later, word comes that Walter had been killed in action at Courcelette. We don't know how it was that Dog Monday knew, but somehow he did. And even though Walter wasn't his person the way that Jem was, he was part of the family that Monday loved so much. Despite the grief, everyone has to carry on. There's no choice. Dog Monday gets stiffer from his vigils in the cold, but he doesn't waver. And though we don't hear from Jem, it's likely that his experience mirrors Monday's. He's likely hurt and tired and worn, but carries on because he promised to. When do we think that Jem even learned of Walter's death? Like, logistically, would he have found out through his commanding officers before even the Blythes were told?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like word must travel fairly fast over there, right? I don't know how far apart Jem and Walter were on the front, though.
I wonder how they handle that with brothers.
I'm sure, unfortunately, that this is not the only time that this happens. I'm sure it's, unfortunately, a regular enough occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
Shirley joins up and is compared to his brothers, quote, not radiantly as to high adventure like Jem, not in a white flame of sacrifice like Walter, but in a cool, businesslike mood, as of one doing something rather dirty and disagreeable that had just got to be done. I wish we got to see what Jem might have written to Shirley. What would he have told him about the realities of war? Would that have contributed to the way that Shirley approached enlisting? Now, obviously, they have very different personalities. Not that we know much about Shirley's personality. But Jem's adventurous spirit must have been altered considerably over the course of nearly 3 years of war. Shirley has much more information than Jem did when he went, and with Walter's death, that danger is much more concrete. The battle at Vimy Ridge is carried by the Canadians, with Jerry Meredith being seriously wounded in that battle, shot in the back. In the Battle of Hill 70, Miller Douglas is wounded and loses his leg as a result. They pass their 4th war Christmas, and Jem is now a lieutenant. Rilla writes, he won his promotion on the field. He sent me a snapshot taken in his new uniform. He looked thin and old. Old, my boy brother Jem. I can't forget Mother's face when I showed it to her. That, my little Jem, the baby of the old house of dreams, was all she said. Jem's youth is being used up by the war. 3 full years of war, when he might have been on the brink of graduating from medical school by now, had there been peace instead.
Faith Meredith is in England now, doing volunteer work, and she was able to see Jem on his last leave. Now, I don't know how often they're able to manage leaves, but it's nice to know that Faith and Jem are able to snatch some moments for themselves during all of these years of misery. Dog Monday continues his vigil as the year 1918 dawns. Rilla writes, quote, I was down to see little Dog Monday today. He has grown quite stiff and rheumatic, but there he sat, waiting for the train. He thumped his tail and looked pleadingly into my eyes. When will Jem come? He seemed to say. Oh, Dog Monday, there is no answer to that question. And there is, as yet, no answer to the other, which we are all constantly asking. What will happen when Germany strikes again on the Western Front? Her one great last blow for victory. And in March of 1918, Germany made a big push, and the news came that they had broken through the line and were shelling Paris. Everyone at Ingleside is sure that this means the war is lost. Finally, they hear that the line broke in only one place, and the shells that are falling in Paris have come from long-range missiles over 70 miles, so the Germans have not yet taken Paris. So it's not good news exactly, but it's better than they feared. The Allied line is being pushed back slowly from the Germans. All through the spring, the news is difficult. More pushes from the Germans, retreats from the Allies, but the German army hasn't broken through yet. And then in May, news comes that during a trench raid, quote, so insignificant that it was never even mentioned in the dispatches, Jem is reported wounded and missing in action.
The thread of hope that he is missing, not dead, is all they can cling to. But it's also a torturous limbo. Rilla feels like she can't hope. But Susan tells her that her first thought was of Dog Monday, and she went right down to the station, and the station master swears that Dog Monday hasn't howled or made a fuss at all, not even the night of the trench raid. Quote, no, Rilla dear, little Jem is not dead, and that you may tie to. If he were, Dog Monday would have known, just as he knew before, and he would not be still waiting for the trains. It seems irrational, but this brings Rilla and Anne and even Gilbert hope. Quote, Rilla believed it for all that, and Mrs. Blythe believed it, and the doctor, though he smiled faintly in pretended derision, felt an odd confidence replace his first despair, and foolish and absurd or not, they all plucked up heart and courage to carry on, just because a faithful little dog at the Glen station was still watching with unbroken faith for his master to come home.
We've talked a bit before about Maud's sort of mixed sense of patriotism in this book. On one hand, this reads like a book where the sentiments of the characters are very pro-war or very patriotic, believing this war is righteous and just. But on the other hand, there's sometimes these like side comments that really ask us to question what was the value of this war, and was the amount of pain that was caused for the men who went and the families who stayed home, was it worth it? And this little line that Jem is reported wounded and missing in action in, quote, a trench raid so insignificant it was never even mentioned in the dispatches, I think is some of Maud's sly critique of the war. We see how tortured the Ingleside folk are by Jem being wounded and missing in action and not knowing if he's alive or dead for weeks and weeks and weeks. And for what? A trench raid that was so insignificant it wasn't even named? It was never reported. No one ever talked about it. And that was the thing that could have taken Jem's life.
Yeah. Well, Dog Monday's tie to Jem gives his family strength as the weeks drag by with no further word of him. Rilla flips back and forth between faith in Monday that Jem is alive and certainty that Jem must be dead. And, quote, Monday was only a poor, faithful, rheumatic little dog who knew nothing more of his master's fate than they did. The waiting is wearing on Rilla. Everything is reminding her of Jem. And while Walter's death was a deep wound, it was a clean and certain wound. And so she's in the process of healing from it. Quote, but the torture of Jem's disappearance was another thing. There was a poison in it that kept it from healing. The alternations of hope and despair, the endless watching each day for the letter that never came, that might never come, the newspaper tales of ill usage of prisoners, the bitter wonder as to Jem's wound, all were increasingly hard to bear. And you can see right there in the quote, the way that the alternations of hope and despair, the waiting for a letter that never comes, how that is so echoed in Dog Monday's experience.
Yeah.
Right? That's this small microcosm that seems just sweet and touching. But if you magnify it to all of these families who are also in the same position, you see how big and how difficult this really is.
Every family in Canada is, to some extent, waiting for that train to come around the bend and waiting for their son or brother or husband or father to get off.
Miss Oliver has another dream. This one portends a turning of the tide and an end to the war, and the Allies start a string of victories. In August, there is word from Carl Meredith that he was wounded and that he has lost the sight in one eye.
Okay, listeners, so we are going to talk for a moment about an incident that regards pet trauma. So if that's not something that you want to listen to or not capable of listening to that right now, just go ahead and skip about 2 minutes. In September of this year, 9-year-old Bruce Meredith overhears someone saying that Jem Blythe is dead and the Ingleside folks just won't accept it. Bruce, who was always devoted to Jem, goes home and decides that he must make a sacrifice. And he drowns his beloved kitten so God would send Jem back. He thinks that because Stripey was the dearest thing he had, that God would surely return Jem. And this is a pretty traumatic example of both devotion and the devastation of this war. I'm not quite sure what Bruce has absorbed from his religious education that would lead him to conclude that this sacrifice is required for Jem's safety. And as Rilla says in her diary, quote, he isn't old enough to understand that God doesn't answer our prayers just as we hope, and doesn't make bargains with us when we yield something we love up to him. She does think it's a beautiful, though sad, thing that Bruce has done.
And to tell the truth, I don't know quite what to make of this moment either from Maud. Is this a metaphor for the kind of sacrifices being made for this war? Does it seem more horrific when we think of a child drowning his kitten than when we think of young men dying on a battlefield? What is she saying about war? Is it that those horrific sacrifices, while not bargains with God exactly, are worth it for something in the long run? Or is it a critique, just as we would critique Bruce Meredith doing something like drowning his kitten so God will grant his prayer? Are we making these sacrifices in vain, or these sacrifices are not directly tied to whatever the outcome is going to be?
Right. I think another way of looking at this maybe is that It goes to the overall loss of innocence that all the characters in the book are experiencing. Jem, of course, is learning that the war that he believed would be a grand adventure is anything but. Rilla is assuming the duties of motherhood before she has even had a proper courtship. All of these characters have lost their youth and their ideals and their innocence in this war, and the way that plays out for little Bruce is in making this grim sacrifice. So, listeners who skipped ahead, you can come back. It's safe now. Whether it was coincidence or divine providence or something else entirely, 4 days afterwards, there is good news.
4 days later, late at night, they get a telegram. Rilla answers the telephone, standing stock still in fear, thinking of Shirley, to hear the station master say that the cable is from Holland, and the message is, "Just arrived, escaped from Germany, quite well, writing, James Blythe." Rilla is stunned and can say nothing. Anne steps into the hallway, knowing that when the phone rang, it was word from Jem. Everyone is stunned into kind of an eerie calmness, and it's only when she's alone that Rilla can finally cry with gratitude. 2 weeks or so later, they get an actual letter from Jem. He had downplayed the "quite well" in his telegram, of course.
Of course.
He reports that he was badly wounded in the thigh. The Germans had picked him up and taken him to prison. He was delirious with fever for weeks. When he finally was well enough, he did write, but that letter and the ones he wrote after it never came. I guess the postal service is a little rough when we're talking about prisoners of war.
Yeah, active wartime.
He reports that he wasn't treated badly at the prison camp, but he had very little food and it was very poor when he did have it. When he was strong enough, he tried to escape but was caught. And then a month after that, he and another soldier made a second attempt and succeeded in getting to safety in Holland. His wound hasn't healed properly, so he's going to a hospital in England for further treatment, so it will be a while before he is able to get home. We don't get any further details about Jem's experience, what it was like emotionally for him during the battle or being wounded and in prison camp, but relief floods Ingleside. And in November, word comes that Germany and Austria are suing for peace. It's not official peace yet, and fighting may still happen for weeks. But eventually the armistice becomes official, and gradually the soldiers begin trickling home. Carl Meredith and Miller Douglas come home just before Christmas. Jerry Meredith and Joe Milgrave come back in January.
And one spring day, quote, when the daffodils were blowing on the Ingleside lawn and the banks of the brook in Rainbow Valley were sweet with white and purple violets, the afternoon train pulls into the station. No one but the station master and Dog Monday are there to meet it this time. Quote, thousands of trains had Dog Monday met, and never had the boy he waited and watched for returned. Yet still Dog Monday watched on, with eyes that never quite lost hope. Perhaps his dog heart failed him at times. He was growing old and rheumatic. When he walked back to his kennel after each train had gone, his gait was very sober now. He never trotted, but went slowly with a drooping head and a depressed tail that had quite lost its old saucy uplift. This time only one passenger steps off, a tall man in a faded lieutenant's uniform. Quote, a black and yellow streak shot past the station agent. Dog Monday stiff? Dog Monday rheumatic? Dog Monday old? Never believe it. Dog Monday was a young pup, gone clean mad with rejuvenating joy. He flung himself against the tall soldier with a bark that choked in his throat from sheer rapture. He flung himself on the ground and writhed in a frenzy of welcome. He tried to climb the soldier's khaki legs and slipped down and groveled in an ecstasy that seemed as if it must tear his little body to pieces. He licked his boots, and when the lieutenant had, with laughter on his lips and tears in his eyes, succeeded in gathering the little creature up in his arms, Dog Monday laid his head on the khaki shoulder and licked the sunburned neck, making queer sounds between barks and sobs. Dog Monday's long vigil was ended. Jem Blythe had come home.
Okay, everyone, take a second, blow your nose, wipe your eyes, because no matter how often I read that passage or listen to it or type it, I tear up every single time.
Every single time. Oh my goodness. So Jem is home at last with a limp in his step and gray in his red hair. Dog Monday refuses to be separated from Jem, sleeping on his bed and accompanying him to church. Quote, in the middle of the sermon, he woke up and seemed to think he must welcome Jem all over again, for he bounced up with a series of barks and wouldn't quiet down until Jem took him up in his arms. But nobody seemed to mind, And Mr. Meredith came and patted his head after the service and said, "Faith and affection and loyalty are precious things wherever they are found. That little dog's love is a treasure, Jem."
Later, Jem and Rilla are talking, and she asks him if he was ever afraid at the front. He says, "Afraid? I was afraid scores of times, sick with fear. I, who used to laugh at Walter when he was frightened." Jem goes on to share that it wasn't until he got home that he really realized that Walter was dead. In the middle of war, so far from home, and the emotional impact of Walter's death just, it couldn't be processed. He says, "You don't know how I miss him now. You folks here have got used to it in a sense, but it's all fresh to me. Walter and I grew up together. We were chums as well as brothers. And now, here in this old valley we loved when we were children, it has come home to me that I'm not to see him again." And I imagine that the grief and trauma of Jem's war experience will take years for him to heal from. Just as everyone on the home front is reckoning with what they lost and sacrificed to the war, Jem has paid a much bigger price, not only in the grief and loss around his brother's death, and the deaths, we can suppose, of many of his friends and comrades in the war, but a loss of his idealism and innocence. To kill another person, to participate in such a massive horror as war, will fundamentally change a person. It must.
This passage where Jem is reckoning with Walter's loss is so interesting to me because it makes sense that Jem would have heard, of course, when Walter died, but it probably didn't feel real because nothing about his life felt real. Everything he can know intellectually that his brother is gone, but he's not going to feel it until he goes to the place where he knew his brother. And just another way that you can tell that Maud understands grief and loss so profoundly. Rilla notes that Jem, her sisters, the Merediths, and everyone returning from war are making plans for the future. Quote, "more soberly than they used to do long ago, but still with interest and a determination to carry on and make good in spite of lost years." Jem is going back to medical school. Faith is going to return to teaching until Jem has finished schooling and until they can be married. How in the world are Jem and Faith, who've just had the adventure of a lifetime, going to go back to medical school and are going to go back to teaching? I ask you. Jem wraps up his experience saying this, quote, "We're in a new world, and we've got to make a better one than the old. That isn't done yet, though some folks seem to think it ought to be. The job isn't finished. It isn't really begun. The old world is destroyed, and we must build up the new one. It will be the task of years. I've seen enough of war to realize that we've got to make a world where wars can't happen. It isn't enough to drive out the old spirit. We've got to bring in the new."
Jem is acknowledging that fighting the war is not in and of itself enough to make any real changes. They stopped something bad from happening, but that doesn't mean that they've made anything good happen yet. And I think that that's a powerful message here. It's much harder to build than to destroy. It's much harder to do the work of making something better for everyone than it is to fight someone else. In order to make meaning from this terrible act of war, it will take everyone working to build a sustainable peace, to make something positive come out of something awful. Whether or not the sacrifices everyone has made of innocence, of youth, idealism, even life itself are, quote, worth the cost that has been extracted, will depend on what they all do next. Maud was writing this just after the war had ended. She did not know yet whether they were building something beautiful from the ashes, although in Jem's voice, she's clearly hoping they will be. The cost of war had not fully been counted yet by the time Maud finished this book, and the reckoning in the aftermath had barely begun. She's ending the book on a hopeful note, but not just hopeful, but challenging the reader to pick up the work and carry on, to make the world new and better. Dog Monday's single-minded devotion, Jem's bravery and chivalry, it only matters if we work to ensure a world where nothing this horrific can happen again. The Jem Blythe on the other side of the war is a different young man than he was at the beginning. His shining idealism and sense of adventure have become something sadder and deeper. He's carrying physical and emotional scars that will last a lifetime. Knowing what we know about World War II and all the wars that have happened since, it's hard to say unequivocally that those sacrifices were worth the cost. Certainly for Maud, as she stood on the threshold of World War II, it seemed that she was drawing the conclusion that it wasn't worth it either. And we'll talk more in depth about that when we get to the Blythes are quoted. But we can still take inspiration from Jem's charge here at the end, that we all must be working to make a world where war can't happen. We aren't close, but we could get closer.
Phew!
Right?
This is a tough book, you guys, and we've said it a lot this season. We'll continue to say it a lot, but certainly talking about Jem's experience really forces us to reckon with some of these hard truths. So for our Birch Path today, I wanted to talk about the time that a Christmas Carol and a bit of bravery stopped World War I. Do you know the story, Reagan?
I've heard it referenced, but I don't know the details.
Well, yes, today I'm going to talk about the Christmas Truce of 1914, which I think will be kind of a nice little story, especially for those of you who are listening to this podcast close in time to when it drops. So yes, by late 1914, the Great War, which was supposed to be over by Christmas, had ground to a horrifying halt. Just 5 months after it began, the armies of Europe were bogged down in trenches that stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland. I mean, this is like the scale that we don't even really get into in this book, but these trenches stretched across the European continent. I mean, the scale is enormous. And at this point, as we've talked about with Jem, the grim reality of the trench warfare had fully set in. The soldiers were living in a desolate landscape of barbed wire, constant dread, and waterlogged ditches where they were huddled against a relentless cycle of shelling. And even more grimly, the bodies of their fallen comrades lay unrecovered in the no man's land between the two lines. It was against this unlikely backdrop of slaughter that one of history's most remarkable and touching stories unfolded. A spontaneous outbreak of peace, humanity, and a shared Christmas spirit. So as we kind of discussed earlier in this episode, the brutal logic of this conflict was designed to dehumanize the men in the opposite trench, right? If you can turn those enemies into someone nameless and faceless and less than human, then they can be targets. But the reality of it is that the front lines were quite proximate. And so it's kind of hard to believe that these people are not real humans when you can see them. And the proximity of the front lines sometimes did allow for these small humanizing moments that unexpectedly stood up against this logic of dehumanization. And on Christmas Eve in 1914, one small such moment blossomed into something extraordinary. So here's what we know about this event. On Christmas Eve, German soldiers began placing candles and even little Christmas trees on their parapets. The German soldiers were decorating for Christmas. Then they began to sing, and one song in particular resonated deeply and was recognized widely across the lines, and that was Stille Nacht, or as we know in English, Silent Night. So as the sound of Stille Nacht floated up from the German trenches, British troops began to respond, and they joined in with English carols of their own. And then that sort of started this like call and response of festive music, which was just echoing across the frozen mud. It was like a concert, this impromptu a cappella concert in the heart of a war zone. As the music rose up over the trenches, so did the men themselves. Ordinary rank and file soldiers started leaving the trenches and flowing into no man's land. It's hard for us to overstate the enormous courage that it must have taken to do that. No Man's Land was full of the bodies of fallen soldiers. It was a ghastly and terrible place. So for the soldiers to be so moved by a song that they willingly went into that space and trusted that they would be safe there, it's astonishing. It's an incredible act of trust and humanity in a time when these soldiers had been so propagandized to believe that the enemy was less than human. So according to those who were there, this all sort of began with shouts of Merry Christmas. They were wishing each other Merry Christmas. A few men clambered over those parapets with their hands held high to show they were unarmed. This is a little unclear. I think there was like a sign in German that was said like, you don't shoot, we don't shoot, or someone said that in sort of whatever their languages were and was able to make themselves understood. And then cautiously, the soldiers from the opposing armies met in the middle, shaking hands and sharing little gifts. They played games and they sort of exchanged whatever little bits they had, right? Like little bits of tobacco or candy, like buttons even was something that they traded apparently. But it was all this just like spontaneous outpouring of goodwill. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this Christmas Truce is that it was widespread. It's estimated that 100,000 troops took part in it.
Wow, really?
Yes.
I had no idea. I thought it was a very small, isolated thing.
Right. I think sometimes the way it has been retold, and certainly what I understood about it before I did some research, was that it was maybe just like a couple units.
Right.
But I think it's one of these things where you just have like miles and miles and miles of trenches on either side. And as you start seeing all the men around you doing it, you start doing it too. So the scale was quite large. And there were many powerful accounts of the troops that come from the soldiers themselves, who captured sort of the astonishment of this day with their letters and diaries. So a private named Henry Williamson tried to explain it to his mother in a letter. He wrote, "In my mouth is a pipe presented by the Princess Mary. In the pipe is tobacco. Of course, you will say. But wait, in the pipe is German tobacco. Ha ha, you say, from a prisoner, or found in a captured trench. Oh dear, no. From a German soldier. Yes, from a live German soldier in his own trench." A captain named Sir Edward Hulsey captured the surreal and almost cinematic quality of the truce, and he described this sing-along that just defied belief. He wrote, "It ended up with Auld Lang Syne, which we all, English, Scots, Irish, Prussians, Württembergers, etc., joined in. It was absolutely astounding, and if I had seen it on a cinematograph film, I should have sworn that it was faked." Captain Robert Miles sensed a deeper war weariness with their German counterparts, a shared feeling that the conflict was a pointless affair between leaders and not the men who were actually fighting it. Quote, "We are having the most extraordinary Christmas Day imaginable. The Germans are distinctly bored with the war. In fact, one of them wanted to know what on earth we were doing here fighting them." Decades later, Alfred Anderson, who was the last known survivor who experienced the Christmas truce, recalled, "I remember the silence, the eerie sound of silence. There was a dead silence that morning right across the land as far as you could see. We shouted, 'Merry Christmas,' even though nobody felt merry. The silence ended early in the afternoon, and the killing started again. It was a short peace in a terrible war." Beyond the celebrations, the Christmas truce served a deeply practical and humane purpose as well. For weeks, the bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides had been left in no man's land, impossible to recover under fire. This ceasefire provided a solemn opportunity to give the dead a proper burial. In a profound moment of shared grief and mutual respect, joint services were held, with former enemies standing side by side to honor their dead comrades. As you might imagine, the leaders of the militaries involved did not respond well to the Christmas truce. And for that following Christmas, Christmas 1915, strict orders were issued not to repeat the truce. And the commanding officers also ordered new attacks to begin shortly after the truce because they wanted to put the soldiers back in the fighting spirit. For the officers on the ground who were caught between the orders from above and the very clear intent of the men they commanded, it was kind of a different story. I really love this description from British Captain Robert Miles of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, who said the truce in his sector was, quote, "a sort of unarranged and quite unauthorized, but perfectly understood and scrupulously observed truce." He also said of the Germans, "The beggars simply disregard all our warnings to get down from off their parapet, so things are at a deadlock. We can't shoot them in cold blood. I cannot see how we can get them to return to business." A German lieutenant, Johannes Niemann, similarly wrote that he, quote, "grabbed my binoculars and looking cautiously over the parapet, saw the incredible sight of our soldiers exchanging cigarette, schnapps, and chocolate with the enemy."
Wow.
As someone who was also trapped in middle management, I can very well understand their frustration. I'm like, I've been telling you to do the opposite of this, but also I completely understand why you're doing this.
Right, right. Oh.
But truly, Reagan, I mean, all jokes aside, this whole story makes me really sad that there was this shared moment of humanity during this terrible war. This moment when the soldiers realized that they were all human beings and they all deserved a safe and peaceful Christmas, and that they had that. And it didn't do anything to change the course of the war, or at least not as far as we know. We do know that reporting on the truce was outright censored in the German and French media, and it was heavily suppressed in the British media. It was somewhat more widely reported in the US. Remember, in 1914, the US was still a neutral party, and the public response to the truce was positive. The public seemed to recognize the tragedy and absurdity of the war beginning again after this truce. For the countries where reporting on the truce was suppressed or censored, those folks at home found out about it from word of mouth, from the men who experienced it themselves. And so over time, it's sort of taken on this like mythological quality. The Christmas truce has inspired films and plays and memorials. It's even inspired some Christmas carols of its own. including Paul McCartney's song Pipes of Peace and Christmas in the Trenches by John McCutcheon. So you may want to add those to your holiday listening this year. And the fact that the truce remains so widely commemorated in memorials, films, and songs speaks to the fact that at its heart it symbolized a very human desire for peace, no matter how fleeting.
That story it's beautiful and it's so sad. And it just breaks my heart that for a moment the soldiers were just young men together, far from home. And then the very next day they had to go back to killing each other.
It's devastating. It's this beautiful story, and then it also just really underscores the brutality of this particular war. Well, Kindred Spirits, this has been a heavy and emotional episode. So for my Inspired by Jem recommendation, I'm going to go for something a little lighter in tone.
Yes, thank you. Let's do that.
Take us out of the trenches a little bit. So Reagan and I always joke that we want fanfic writers to write about all the scenes in these books that Maud leaves out. And so today I'm going to recommend a piece of fanfic that does exactly that. So in Rilla of Ingleside, we miss out on so much of what is happening with Jem and Faith, with Jerry and Nan, with Walter and Di while they are away from Ingleside. And there is a great fanfic that imagines some of those gaps. It is beautifully written by an author who is clearly an Ella Montgomery fan, and it works seamlessly into the canon of Rilla of Ingleside, the Blythes are quoted, and important historical dates and troop movements in World War I. It's the story of the older Blythe and Meredith kids told through their letters to one another. It is very good. It's so well written, and because it's epistolary, it reads pretty fast. The story captures these characters beautifully. It's a very respectful and loving homage to the series. I am pretty picky about fanfic, and I'm telling you guys, I recommend this one. The fic is called Dispatches. The author is Eliza Skye, and it's on an archive of our own. We will link it in the episode description for you all.
Kelly, I have been meaning to read this because you have recommended it to me a couple of times. And being so deep in this book and really realizing how much I would love to hear what these characters are really experiencing. All right, I'm definitely going to check it out. Well, for my Inspired by Jem, I want to recommend donating to Doctors Without Borders, which is a leading international medical relief organization, and it provides direct medical assistance to people affected by armed conflicts, natural disasters, epidemics, and other emergencies. International Rescue Committee is another good organization to donate to that directly helps people and refugees affected by war and disaster. They provide cash assistance with no strings attached, which also helps local economies, as well as healthcare and education, and ensuring that marginalized groups have equal access to social and economic opportunities. And if you have a favorite organization that do good work that you believe in to make this world a better place, now is a good time to donate, volunteer, and spread the word.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Kindred Spirits, that's it for today's trip to Ingleside. If you enjoyed spending time with us, we'd be so grateful if you'd rate and review the show wherever you listen. It truly helps other Anne fans discover Kindred Spirits Book Club. And don't forget, if you email us about your review, we'll send you a thank you note and our lovely KSBC sticker. Go ahead and email us at kindredspirits.bookclub@gmail.com to let us know that you shared. You can also keep in touch with us on Instagram at kindredspirits.bookclub. We hope you will join us for our next episode in 2 weeks. And this time we are going to be discussing Walter Blythe, whose compassion, conscience, and courage defined his experience with this war. Meanwhile, we hope you have a lovely holiday no matter what you celebrate. Happy New Year, Kindred Spirits.
Happy New Year!